All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live Bracketology show here on at noon Eastern Time on Sunday, February 15th, exactly 1 month away from Selection Sunday. Um, Here's my most recent projection up here. We're going to go through it, and then if there's any questions at the end, I'll go over those too. But it's been about a week since I did my last projection, so a ton of changes. um, if you saw that, it's going to be a lot different this time. So let's start off with um, the mid majors, the that won their leagues. I did this really complex process where I looked at the standings, and whoever was in first got the automatic bid for the conference. Um, and then, these teams have different resumes, so you're able to seed them from there. But um, the 12 line looks incredibly scary. Belmont, Liberty, USF, and Yale, all really solid teams. High Point, Stephen F. Austin, and Hawaii are all top 100 Ken Palm teams also. So perhaps that can be something that, you know, if all those teams do go through their conference tournament and win, um, potentially they could knock off an upset in the first round. There's a notable conference champion from a mid-major league that is not there. We're going to talk about them later. So now let's turn it around to the number one seeds. And I did not change them. Duke lost to North Carolina last week, and Arizona lost twice to this week, once to Kansas and then once to Texas Tech. The only thing that really changed here was the order. Michigan now goes to my number one overall seed. Duke number two, Arizona number three. So Arizona falls from first to third. That doesn't really matter for the regions because those were the three regions that those three teams would pick anyway. But it does change some things down the road. UConn stays in my fourth number one seed. A little bit of a conversation about another team there, but not really. UConn just 2 losses on the year, one of them to Arizona, and the other one at St. John's. So that can be something we can get to later if there are any questions about that. But those are the number one seeds. I don't think you're going to see much of a difference there. There's a chance that maybe that fourth one seed is a little different in other projections, but not for me today. All right, for the two seeds, we did have a little bit of a change here. We have Purdue coming up to the 2 line and replacing Nebraska. And then in terms of bracketing rules, Houston and Iowa State cannot be in Arizona's region. Purdue and Illinois cannot be in Michigan's region. So this is how it turns out. The first 4 teams from each conference must be in different regions, and then after that, it can get a little difficult to make sure the bracketing principles are not violated. If you see some projections out there, even from some big brands, they don't always know all the rules. So that is definitely one of them. On the 3 line is Florida, Kansas, Texas Tech, and Nebraska. Nebraska being the 4th Big Ten team, they had to go to the South region. And then Texas Tech Kansas was the fourth highest ranked team from the Big 12, so they had to go to the East. And then Texas being the 5th goes to Arizona, so they cannot meet until the Elite 8. But in terms of this one, Nebraska, all these teams are pretty similar. Florida has made a big jump as well, up from, believe I had them as a 4 seed last time to the 3 seed that they currently sit at. So now for the 4 seeds, it's Vanderbilt, Michigan State, Gonzaga, and Virginia. Gonzaga picked up a really important road victory against Santa Clara last night, which puts them back in the driver's seat to win the West Coast Conference. You had Virginia, who won a neutral court game against Ohio State yesterday. And then you have Michigan State, who floundering a little bit, but still a really great resume with a ton of great wins. And then Vanderbilt has weathered the storm there that they had. Once they lost their first game, looked like they might be slipping away, but they've been able to right the ship a little bit since that loss to Oklahoma at home. All right, and now for the 5 seeds. We've got North Carolina, St. John's, Tennessee, and Arkansas. For more bracketing things here, we have teams 2 and 3 from the SEC, or teams 3 and 4 from the SEC. Now, I may have violated the own rules here because Vanderbilt's not supposed to be in the Midwest. Vanderbilt's supposed to be in a different conference in Florida, or different region, but yes, we'll have to tweak that around for the official release. But the Tennessee, Arkansas, and a team that we'll see later all played each other in a round robin, so it should be pretty easy to seed those teams if they end up near each other at the end of the season. Then we have St. John's picked up that big victory against UConn, like I said, and they've been able to win since they picked up a big win against Providence yesterday on the road. A lot of controversy in that game, but for bracketing reasons, they did beat the team that beat them at home. That is the sore spot for St. John's on their resume. They do have a quad 3 loss, which is when Providence went in there and beat them. But they beat them again later in the year. So I think, not that you can totally erase it, but I think that is something that could come into play when looking at quad 3 losses. And for North Carolina, they've got the Caleb Wilson news. Different reports have his timetable different, but he's going to miss some time for North Carolina. He's their best player by far. It's important for the Tar Heels to show that they're still a decent team without him, because the committee will take that into effect. And it's pretty important that he comes back before the end of the season, too, or they're going to be judged more harshly on the time that they did not have him if it didn't go well. And that sort of thing will come up again with another team later, and I believe they're going to be here on the 6th line. Yes, they are. So the 6th line, Louisville, Kentucky, St. Louis, and Alabama. Tennessee, Arkansas, and Louisville all played each other already, so it should be pretty easy to stack those teams based on the head-to-head if they're close, like I said. In terms of Kentucky, they were playing some great basketball, and they still are. A road loss to Florida yesterday, not going to kill them, but they have made a big jump recently. They've got a great resume. With Kentucky, you've got 28th in the net, which is a little bit lacking, but you still have 3 Quad 1A wins and 5 total Quad 1 wins. So I think that Kentucky is going to be ranked right there. And with St. Louis, their resume keeps getting better and better. They're top 20 in the net, 24th across the resume metrics, 23rd across the quality. They do just have that one loss, which was on a buzzer beater by Stanford on a neutral. Now, Stanford has fallen off a little bit, but I still don't think that's a bad loss. They do have 2 Quad 1 wins, St. Louis, and, a 12-1 record in meaningful games. So I think St. Louis has a chance maybe to even get up to the 5 line if they can run the table and get to the big dance with just one loss. And then in terms of Alabama, Charles Bediako has been ruled ineligible for the rest of the season. That means that, the committee did say that they're going to treat him like an unavailable player, and they are going to be judged on who they are without him more so than they are with him. Now, he only played 5 games. I believe they were 3-2. But still, that might ding him a spot or two, just because they did pick up 2 of those 3 wins that they had were Quad 1. On to the 7 line, we've got Wisconsin, Villanova, BYU, and Utah State. The BYU conundrum here is that because they cannot play on Sundays, they have to be in the West or the South region. And they also have to go to a site that plays on Thursday and Saturday the first weekend, too. So they cannot be in the East or the Midwest. Definitely not. That is, if you see a projection with them in there, that's not allowed. But then in terms of Utah State, they've sort of taken control of the Mountain West here. They're up in top 25 in net. They're 26th across every metric. They have 3 quad 1 wins. They just have 3 total losses. And yeah, one of them's in quad 2 and quad 3, but 17-3 in meaningful games. I think Utah State has separated themselves from the pack in the Midwest, in the Mountain West here. In terms of Wisconsin, they probably jumped as much as any team can this week with a victory on the road at Illinois, and then they followed that up with a victory at home against Michigan State pretty handily as well. So I think they went from a 10 seed to a 7 seed here. They're 33rd in the net. You know, if you're hosting Wisconsin, that's still a quad 2 game, which is crazy. But you know, they've got the 3 quad 1A wins, the away victories at Michigan and Illinois, and then the home game at Michigan State. And then they do just have 1 loss in quad 2. So and that is a home game to USC, I believe. So I think that, you know, Wisconsin's in really good shape. They've separated themselves over the bubble here, and I could see them, you know, going even further up the seed list if, you know, their metrics catch up a little bit. They did have a couple of heavy losses early on in the year to some good teams, but if they, you know, they can even that out a little bit. You know, they're 32nd in Genpom, 24th in Torvik. Like, they can get a little better in those and potentially increase their seed big time. All right, for the 8 seeds, we've got Clemson, UCF, Texas A&M, and Iowa. A little bit of an interesting situation here with Clemson. They had a tough week where they lost at home to Virginia Tech, and then they lost at Cameron Indoor. They still have 4 quad 1B wins, but they do have 2 Q2 losses and no top of the line victory to you know, propel them a little bit higher. So, like, I don't think we're at the bubble yet. They're 15-6 in meaningful games, top 30 across every metric except for KenPom and the net. I think Clemson's still in a good spot after a little bit of a tough week. Then in terms of UCF, we've got, you know, their net is a little bit lacking. They're at 49th. You know, their quality metrics aren't great in terms of seeding, but in terms of resume, which is what comes with selection, because when I say that, it's supposed to be 2 different processes. You seed the teams, or no, you pick the teams separately, and then you seed the teams after you pick the teams. It's not sort of at the same time here. So UCF is not going to have a problem being selected, but if they do continue to, you know, the quality metrics tend to lag behind a little bit here, they might be a little bit lower than maybe they should be. They are outside the top 50 in all 3, except their worst resume metric is 33rd. So a little bit of an interesting resume there from UCF. They do have that quad 1A win. They have 3 other quad 1 wins. They have no losses outside the top 2 quads. Like, we're definitely not at the bubble yet. And in terms of A&M and Iowa, both kind of falling off a little bit. In terms of A&M, their predictives are much better than in terms of Iowa. Their whole resume is really good, honestly, despite not really, you know, having a win over anybody ahead of them in the tournament outlook. They have 1 quad 1A win that was a road win at Assembly Hall against Indiana, and they've got great, you know, 27th in the net. Resume metrics are high 30s. Quality metrics are in the 20s. Like, they're probably going to make it, but, you know, as that record starts to not get great, they're just 10-7 in the top 3 quads with a quad 2 and a quad 3 loss. You know, they might get dragged a little bit closer to the bubble than they want to be, but I still think they'll be in. And then in terms of A&M, it's sort of the opposite. They have 3 top-of-the-line wins. Some of them have, you know, aged a little better here recently, but, you know, just 9-8 in meaningful games. So for Texas A&M, they might be dragged down a little bit here too. All right, now to the other side here. Whoops. Okay. 9 seeds. We've got Georgia, Indiana, SMU, and NC State. In terms of Georgia, they are definitely falling a little bit here. They are just 8-8 in meaningful games. They have a quad 2 loss, they have a quad 3 loss, and they have no wins in the top part of quad 1. So that is why Georgia has started to fall a little bit. Nothing really comes out looking at the resume. I mean, they're low 40s in just about every metric across both, 39th in the net. Like, I think this team is probably like a bubble in team, one of the last 8 teams in right now. They are my last 9 seed in terms of ranking. And then in terms of Indiana, they are a little bit similar to Iowa in terms of the numbers. Now, Iowa did beat Indiana, so if they're close, Iowa's going to get the nod on the head-to-head. But resume metrics were the thing lacking earlier in the year, but they have improved greatly. Indiana's won 5 of their last 6, 3 of them over tournament teams. And then Purdue and Wisconsin, who they beat, have now gone on to play really well after that, too. So they're into the top 40 in resume, and they're 27th across the quality metrics. They have 2 Quad 1A wins and just 1 loss outside of Quad 1. They do only have 4 wins in the top 2 quads, but 2 of them are in Quad 1A, and they have 6 wins in Quad 3. So they're a little bit away from the bubble, too, right now. Big one tipping off in just over half an hour, Indiana and Illinois. So if they could win that one, that'll probably be it stamped. But they probably just need to take care of business. Don't get a Quad 3 loss. Maybe pick up a couple of Quad 2s, and Indiana will be going to the dance if they take care of business. In terms of NC State, this is a really interesting one. The eye test would suggest that they're not really ready to make the tournament, but their resume says a completely different story. With NC State, they've got 2 Quad 1A wins and 3 Quad 1 wins. I think they've beaten 3 ACC teams on the road that are going to be in the tournament. They're 33rd across the resume, 29th across the quality. They've lost a lot of games here. They've lost 8 games, which isn't a problem right now, but I don't think they're going to be dragged down close to the bubble either, but they've gotten blasted in a few of these games by good teams, and it doesn't look like they're a tournament team, but then their resume says a different story. They do have the Quad 4 loss, NC State. It was a home game to somebody, but that is something that's going to pull a team down. They are the highest ranked team that has a Quad 4 loss, so if you look at all their numbers are better, well, that is why. And I think it'll cost them probably a seed line. And then in terms of SMU, pretty similar resume to Indiana, where you have a ton of losses in Quad 1 and just 1 loss outside of it. Indiana has 8 losses, SMU has 8 losses. Indiana just their Quad 1 wins are a little better, so that's why I gave them the edge there. All right, in terms of the 10 seeds, we have got Texas, Miami, St. Mary's, and USC. So Texas and Miami jumped into the field for me, and then they have cleared the first 4 by quite a bit because the 2 other teams that I have on the 11 line are ahead of the teams in the first 4. So this is the spot where you're getting a little bit, not worried, but there's definitely more work to do for any of the teams on the right side of this graphic. But now we're getting into really, tough to pick who's going to be in, who's not. Every team has a reason to leave them out. Every team has a reason to put them in. It's why it's difficult to get all the teams right. And this is the 5th year of me doing this. I've gotten all of them right once. And last year I missed 3, the year before 1. It's pretty easy to get the first 60 or so. And obviously half of them because the automatic bids, and then 30 or so at-larges are pretty obvious. But this is where, bracketology gets real interesting. You're going to see these teams ranked all over the place. But let's start with Texas. I had them out of the field. They were 11-9 at one point, but they've won 5 in a row to now be 16-9, which in the SEC is pretty solid. They do have 2 high Quad 1A wins. They have 3 other Quad 1B. They do have 2 Quad 2 losses and a Quad 3 loss. So their meaningful games record is 8-9. Now, that usually would be a disqualifier. But last year, Texas got in with 3 games under 500 in meaningful games. So if they're able to tilt enough of their wins towards Quad 1 and Quad 1A, they're going to be in again. And this team definitely has a better case than last year's to make it. So that's why I have them in the field by quite a bit. Then in terms of St. Mary's, they've got just 4 losses on the year, which will probably keep them in. But they have no losses or no wins in Quad 1. And they do have 5 Quad 1 or 2 wins, but they do have a loss. So I mean, St. Mary's is probably just going to be in this 9-10 range unless they're able to beat a Gonzaga or lose to somebody that's not Santa Clara or Gonzaga. So St. Mary's takes care of business, beats who they're supposed to. They're going to be in the tournament, but there's a lot of landmines out there in the WCC, and if they were to lose one, I think, they lose a landmine and then they lose in the WCC tournament. That means they'll have 6 losses. I could see them being left out with that. But, their resume is pretty solid. They're 26th in the net, 33rd across everything. Like, they should be higher in terms of their resume, but their wins haven't really matched that. They haven't gotten that big win yet, whether it was in the non-con or in the WCC. All right, Miami now picked up a big road victory against NC State yesterday. It seems like Miami's a better team, but the resume just doesn't say that. Miami has really solid resume metrics, but this week really, coming into this week, they didn't have any wins against the field. They picked up 2 of them in a row. They beat North Carolina on Tuesday, and then they beat NC State yesterday. So I think that's definitely enough for them to get in the field. They start to have the wins to back up their resume, and, they do have a Quad 3 and a Quad 2 loss, which is what's probably pulling them down a little bit. Like I said, just the one Quad 1 win, because home to North Carolina. Let's see, where's North Carolina in the net? All right, so home to North Carolina is the Quad 1 win. I guess at NC State isn't. Oh no, I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong line. They have 4 Quad 1 wins, 3 in Quad 1B. 2 of those 4 obviously came in the last week. So, if they can get themselves away from the bubble a little bit, make that Quad 3 loss, which was home to Florida State, make that not matter, they'll be in the tournament. All right, USC, the last team here on this 10 line, they've got a very interesting resume. Their metrics are kind of all over the place. They're 32nd in one, 49th in another, 48th in the net. They do have that Quad 1A win, which was a road win against Wisconsin. That has obviously aged really well. But then, they have a home loss to Northwestern. They're 9-6 across the top 2 quads. So they have a Quad 2 and 3 loss as well, like Miami. But Miami has more Quad 1B wins, and those are Quad 2A for USC. So it's very close between these two teams. USC has 7 losses, Miami has 5. But in terms of, Miami has 10 Quad 4 wins. So these two teams are very close right now. And because of the way their opponents have played, Miami's games have snuck their way into Quad 1 here, and USC's haven't. So I think it's very close between these two teams, but I think that's why they're clear of the bubble. And then in terms of the real bubble now, I think all 4 of these teams are going to be in almost every projection, but there's at least a little bit of an argument to leave them out. In terms of the 11 seeds, here we go. So we have Miami, Ohio, and Santa Clara here. Santa Clara is no longer a automatic bid team because they lost to Gonzaga yesterday. Gonzaga has taken the top spot. Santa Clara, I think, is good enough to get in anyway. That's why they're my 5th to last team in. Miami is in the automatic bid pool, like I said, but I think they're also clear of the last 4 in. I think if Miami loses one basketball game in the MAC tournament, I think they'll be in. Now, if they lose before the MAC tournament and then again in the MAC tournament, maybe if it's to Akron, there's something there, but I don't think the committee wants to leave out a 2-loss Miami, but I think they will if it comes to it, because with Miami, you have a team that played 4 D2 games, 350th in terms of strength of schedule. They really didn't beat anyone close to the tournament. They have just one quad 2 win, so the arguments are certainly there to leave them out. But now, in this current snapshot, they do not have a loss. They're first in their league, so they're the automatic bid. I think if they can get to the MAC tournament undefeated, I think they'll be in the tournament. But it would be a lot easier for them to just win every game. And then in terms of Santa Clara, they've got a very interesting resume. They are pretty similar to NC State, Georgia, that line. They're just a little bit worse in everything. Like, they're 42nd in the net versus Georgia and SMU in the high 30s. You know, they've got 41 across the predictives instead of the high 30s like SMU and Georgia. The problem is for Santa Clara is that they have a quad 4 loss at home to Loyola Chicago, who have been one of the worst teams in the Atlantic 10 this year and have just been a dreadful basketball team. So that is what's dragging them down away from them, I think. This is the second highest ranked team, in my opinion, that has a quad 4 loss. They are 16-5 in meaningful games. They have a quad 1 win. They've played 3 quad 1A games. They've lost them. They have 5 quad 2 wins. Like, I think Santa Clara is in the field. You know, there's a really good argument for them to be in the field. And they already have a win over a tournament team in St. Mary's. So I think Santa Clara and Miami are both clear of these last 4 in. All right, last 4 in. Everybody can see them, but if you can't, for some reason, it's Auburn, UCLA, TCU, and VCU. Now, Auburn and UCLA are 4th and 3rd to last, and I think there's a little bit of a drop-off. There's a little bit of a difference between the top 2 and the bottom 2. UCLA is just sort of not really clicked recently. They're 40th in the net. They've got the one quad 1A win against Purdue. You know, they have another quad 1 win. They have 2 losses in quad 2. They're 11-8 in meaningful games. It just seems like they're just last 4 in. Like, that looks like a last 4 in resume to me. They deserve to be in because they've beaten a team that's in the tournament and a protected seed at that matter, but they've lost a lot of basketball games. You know, they have 8 losses already, and they're just 9-8 in meaningful games. So with UCLA, it's going to be nail-biting time all the way down to the wire. Every single game matters. Now, they're in the Midwest right now. They got smoked by Michigan yesterday by 30. They play Illinois next, I think. So, look, they're going to have to at least show that they belong on the same floor because they didn't yesterday. And then in terms of Auburn, they're a team that's falling fast. They have a 14-11 overall record. And while 14 of those 25 games are in quad 1, you know, this is why I've dragged them down closer to the bubble. They have 2 wins in quad 1A, 2 wins in quad 1B, but they do have a quad 2 loss, and they're just 8-11 in meaningful games. That sounds a lot like 9-12, which is what Texas was last year. So the resume, obviously, too good to leave Auburn out. They've got the wins against tournament teams. They've got all the numbers that say that they deserve to be in the tournament. But they're 14-11, and they have got to continue to win games here. And they do have, they've had way more opportunities than everyone else. Like, if is 4 of 14. Look, of course you have 4 wins against quad 1. You've played 14 games. Like, these other teams that are, 2-2 or 1-2 or even 1-3, like, I think there's an argument to be made there that those teams deserve to be in over Auburn. But still, I just couldn't leave them out. They've got a ton of wins against the field. They do play a couple of non-tournament team SEC teams to end the season here. So if they can win those, get away from 500, I think they'll be in. But all of a sudden, it's gotten pretty nervy for Auburn. Like, they won at Florida. They won at Alabama. Like, they're too good to leave out. But if they're 500, like, they're not going to be in. So interesting case there for Auburn. All right, TCU and VCU, my last two teams in. Now, I've really had to search for these last two spots. Other teams that are in my first four out lost, some of them badly at home. So I went with TCU here because they beat Iowa State this week. They've got two top of the line wins. They have what's called hit for the cycle. That is not a good thing. They've won and lost a game in every quad, which, they do have that quad 4 loss to New Orleans on opening day. They have a quad 3 loss, which was home to a non-tournament team in the Big 12, I think. They are 9-8 in meaningful games. They do have the quad 4 loss. They have 5 quad 1 wins. They're 45th in that. They seem to me like a team that the committee is going to make prove it in Dayton. You've beaten a bunch of good teams. You've lost to a couple bad teams. Let's see what you got in Dayton. All right, my last team in is VCU, a team that has sort of come out of nowhere in terms of bubble talk recently. They were not in my first four out last time. Their resume suggests everything's mid-40s roughly, that they should be in and around the bubble. They do have 5 quad 2 wins. They've played 4 Q1s and they've lost them all. They're 5-6 in the top 2 quads and 11-6 in meaningful games. I think with VCU, it's going to be very important that, I wouldn't they only have one more chance for a big, win against a tournament team in St. Louis. And they already played them. They lost to them at home. They lost to George Mason, but they're very clearly the second best team in this league in the Atlantic 10. And I think at 20-6, with a couple of decently scheduled non-conference games where they lost on the road at Utah State, close game, could have gone either way. They lost on the road at NC State, close game, could have gone either way. They beat South Florida. They lose to Vanderbilt. They beat Virginia Tech, who's a bubble team. They lose to New Mexico, who's a bubble team. So they've sort of been really close with a lot of these bubble teams. Now, South Florida's not a win against an at-large team, but it's still a win against the field. So if they can get this St. Louis game, I think they'll be in really good shape. And even if not, if they can take care of business, they're going to get 2 shots at St. Louis, 2 more shots. And I think if they win one of them, they're probably in. Now, obviously, if they win the A10 tournament, they're in. But I'm starting to like VCU's resume a lot more. These 5 quad 2 wins, some of them are really close to turning to quad 1. So without doing anything, they could turn over there as well. All right. That's the field of 68 that we have seeded. Now, in terms of the first 4 out, let's get this out of there. Whoops. My first team out is Missouri. They lost at home to Texas last night. It was a game that really was not close. Texas was dominant. They won pretty easily. And, it was a home loss for Missouri. They're 66th in the net, which would be really hard to select them. Not impossible. We've seen worse teams make it. But they do have 2 quad 1A wins. They have 3 and 4 in quad 2. They are 11-8 in meaningful games. But I think to have this many losses, of which they have 8, they need to have more, better wins. And, they're going to play a lot of these teams in and around them, and they've got to beat them. And they got smoked by Texas yesterday. All right, my second team out is Ohio State. Heartbreaking loss to Virginia yesterday. Could have gone either way, but Ohio State just keeps coming up short in these games against tournament teams. They do not have a quad 1 victory yet. They're 0-8. They do have 2 wins against the field. The California Big Ten schools at home, which very easily could go away. They've had a ton of close games against, they beat UCLA at home, and then when did they play USC? Yeah, they beat them too. So, look, wins over the field are obviously important, but home wins against bubble plus teams, I think they need some quad 1 wins. Now, they had one because Northwestern was 75th in the net, they beat Northwestern on the road. Northwestern has dropped out of the top 75. So that's why if you've seen them have a quad one win and have it taken away, that is why. Um, but yeah, Ohio State's got to beat some more tournament teams, and they've had plenty of opportunities, and they have not done it enough. And they have a quad two loss. So just 10-9 in meaningful games without any real clear victories against really good teams. I think that's why they're out for me right now. I've been a little bit higher on them than most. I just couldn't leave them in this time. And then my last two teams in the first four out are San Diego State and New Mexico. That Mountain West that I was talking about earlier with Utah State. Utah State separated themselves from these two. Both of these teams are mid 40s across everything, but they both have quad 3 losses, and they both just have one quad 1B win. And if their wins are against each other and then they lose to some other people, it's probably not enough to get in. I think they need to beat Utah State to get in. Just their resume says they'd be squarely on the bubble, mid 40s across everything, and then the metrics say that. Now, in terms of their resume, do you have a win over a clear tournament team? No. So that's why. And they have a bad loss as well. That's why I think they're out. And in terms of other teams that I considered, I went three more: Virginia Tech, Cal, and Seton Hall. Virginia Tech picked up that huge win at Clemson, which definitely pushed them back in at the time. But then they get punked at home by quad 3 Florida State. So that is one that immediately erases the good that they did against Clemson. Because not only did they lose at home to a quad 3, but they got smoked. That game was over quickly. So Virginia Tech is 10-9 in quad meaningful games. They've got one great win, like I said, but that's just too many losses. So can't have men. And then for Cal too, it's pretty similar. They have one great win, three other solid wins in quad 1B, but just 4 wins in the top 2 quads and 9-8 in meaningful games. So if you're going to lose a lot of games, you've got to have it really tilted towards quad 1A and have some wins against those teams too, or it's just not going to be enough this year. You start adding some teams in with some quad 3s and quad 4 losses, and that's why they find themselves on the wrong side of the bubble. And in terms of Seton Hall, they just have one win against the field. It was a neutral court win against NC State and Maui. The resume, all of their metrics suggest mid-50s, which is definitely too far off in terms of getting in the field. And then you add in the fact that they have just one win against the field. They have 3 quad 2 losses. They don't have a quad 1A. So those are the first 7 teams out, roughly. That's really it in terms of bracketology. This projection will be going out pretty soon. Just going to check a few things before we wrap this up. Not many comments, so no questions really that we're going to answer. So yeah, this is where we're going to wrap this thing up. This projection will be going out soon. Please check out the other videos if you haven't already. Please check out the bracket matrix if you haven't already. A ton of other projections alongside mine there that sort of aggregate out the average. So we'll wrap it up here. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.